She built a skyline empire from the top of New York's tallest towers, but could not bridge the silence between herself and her deaf daughter. Madison Clark had 12 years to speak her child's language. She failed. Then, inside a quiet Brooklyn cafe, a widowed father lifted his hands and signed one word. In 5 minutes, Lily lit up with laughter Madison had never seen. What Daniel Brooks revealed next would shatter Madison's certainty about love, power, and what it truly means to be a mother. New York City in late October carried a restless spirit. The air was crisp, the kind that made pedestrians pull their coats tighter as the wind swept through the canyons of skyscrapers. Morning sunlight bounced off the mirrored facades, turning the skyline into a shifting tapestry of steel and gold. From the penthouse of a glass tower in Midtown, one could see the Hudson River gleaming in the distance, ferries slicing across its surface like purposeful ants. Inside that penthouse, where the scent of imported orchids mixed with the sterile cleanliness of marble floors, Madison Clark stood at the window and stared at the city she had conquered but never truly belonged to. Madison Clark was a woman built out of fire and ice. At 38, she commanded Clark Media Holdings, one of the most influential communications empires on the East Coast. She was tall, with a commanding presence that filled any boardroom. Her figure was lean, sculpted from years of discipline rather than vanity, and her tailored navy suit was as much armor as it was attire. Platinum blonde hair was pulled into a sleek knot at the nape of her neck, every strand in place as if disorder itself was her sworn enemy. Colleagues spoke of her with admiration and fear, whispering that she could slice through negotiations with nothing more than a raised brow. Yet behind her ice-blue eyes, the kind that could disarm or dismantle, was a heaviness that even power could not dissolve. Her life had been broken once, 8 years ago, and though she had glued the pieces back together, the cracks still showed when the light hit them just right. The crack had a name, Lily Clark. Lily was 12 now, tall for her age but delicate, with hair the color of chestnuts that framed her pale face in soft waves. Her eyes, green-flecked with gold, were windows of expression more eloquent than any words she could never speak. Born with a neurological condition that silenced her before she ever found her voice, Lily had grown up in a world without sound. She communicated through drawings, gestures, and the hesitant fragments of American Sign Language her mother had tried and failed to master. Her favorite refuge was her sketch pad, where she captured the world in lines and colors instead of syllables. Madison had promised herself she would learn sign language fluently. She had studied books, watched tutorials, hired tutors, but the graceful fluency of native signers always eluded her. Meetings, deadlines, and the endless grind of corporate warfare always intruded, and in the end, her attempts with Lily turned into clumsy half-conversations, riddled with frustration. For Madison, every missigned word was a reminder that she could close billion-dollar contracts, yet could not reach across the silence to her daughter. For Lily, every misunderstanding pushed her further inward. Their home, despite its panoramic views and expensive art, was a fortress of unspoken words. Madison turned away from the window, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor as she walked past the silent breakfast table. Lily sat there, a bowl of cereal untouched, sketching the silhouette of a tree shedding its leaves. The girl didn't look up when Madison passed. Madison paused, watching the delicate movements of her daughter's pencil. She wanted to kneel down, touch her shoulder, and say something, anything that might bridge the gap. But the words never came. Instead, she adjusted her suit jacket and murmured, "I'll be late tonight." It was a pointless habit, speaking aloud to someone who couldn't hear. Lily lifted her eyes briefly, unreadable, then went back to drawing. Across the city, in Brooklyn, a very different morning was unfolding. The neighborhood of Park Slope was alive with the sound of children running to school and the smell of bagels drifting from corner bakeries. On the second floor of a weathered brownstone, Daniel Brooks tied his son's shoelaces with deliberate care. Daniel was 39, with an easy warmth that softened his angular frame. His sandy brown hair was often in disarray, his hazel eyes alive with patience. Life had etched lines around those eyes, not of bitterness, but of endurance. He wore simple clothes, flannel shirt, worn jeans, that carried the comfort of someone who valued substance over display. Daniel was a teacher at the Brooklyn School for the Deaf, where he taught American Sign Language and worked with children who saw communication as an art, not an obstacle. Teaching was not just his profession, it was his inheritance. His mother, once a teacher at the California School for the Deaf, had raised him bilingual in English and ASL. He often said he learned to sign before he could properly speak. That early immersion shaped him into a man who listened with more than ears. He listened with his whole being. At his side was Ethan, his 7-year-old son, a bundle of unfiltered energy wrapped in a dinosaur-patterned sweater. Ethan had a mop of sandy hair that refused to obey combs, and a grin that often came with missing front teeth. Unlike Lily, who had learned silence, Ethan's world was full of chatter and laughter, though beneath his cheerfulness was a sensitivity inherited from his father. Ethan had lost his mother, Beth, when he was only 3 years old. Though too young to remember her voice, he carried a quiet longing that sometimes peeked through in unexpected moments. But Ethan never felt truly alone, because he had Shadow. Shadow was a German shepherd, large and noble even in age. His fur was once a rich black and tan coat, now silvering around the muzzle with the dignified touch of time. His most striking feature, however, was the white cloth that covered his eyes, tied carefully by Daniel to protect the dog's sensitive sockets. Shadow was blind, the result of a degenerative condition that had slowly taken his sight. Yet blindness had not dimmed his spirit. At 10 years old, Shadow moved with confidence, guided not by vision, but by instinct and the unbreakable bond he shared with Ethan. Wherever the boy went, Shadow followed, each step careful, each turn precise, as if he could sense the world through the heartbeat of the child beside him. To Ethan, Shadow was not just a pet, but a brother, a guardian, and a confidant. To Daniel, the dog was a miracle of resilience, teaching his son that strength was not measured by what one had lost, but by how one lived despite it. Shadow's calm presence had seen Ethan through nightmares, lonely nights, and the aching question every child of loss carried. Why did she leave? Shadow never answered, but his warm breath against Ethan's cheek was its own kind of reply. As Daniel gathered Ethan's backpack and Shadow's leash, he glanced around their modest apartment. It was nothing like the glass penthouse of Madison Clark, but it was alive with warmth. Family photos on the walls, Ethan's crayon drawings taped to the fridge, a stack of ASL flashcards on the table. Life was not perfect, but it was real. The Brooks family stepped out into the brisk morning. Shadow's paws patted against the sidewalk. Ethan chattered about a new dinosaur fact, and Daniel listened with one ear while scanning the day ahead. Somewhere across the river, Madison Clark's day was beginning with board meetings and glass towers. She had no idea yet that their worlds were on a collision course, that her silence and his signs, her daughter's loneliness and his son's laughter, would soon intertwine in ways none of them could foresee. For now, the city carried them in separate currents. Madison stood in her penthouse, trapped by unspoken words. Daniel walked down a Brooklyn street, accompanied by his son and a blind dog who never wavered. The day was ordinary. The storm had not yet begun. The Saturday morning air in Brooklyn felt different from Manhattan's. Here, the sunlight filtered through rows of maples and oaks that lined the sidewalks, scattering gold and russet leaves across brownstone steps. The breeze carried the scent of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor and the faint tang of wood smoke from apartments beginning to turn on their fireplaces. For Madison Clark, used to the sterile chill of skyscraper boardrooms, the neighborhood felt almost foreign, too alive, too uncurated. She kept her stride measured, her leather heels clicking against the pavement as she guided her daughter toward a cafe she had only read about in a glossy lifestyle feature. It was supposed to be cozy, warm, family-friendly, qualities she hoped might coax something resembling connection out of the silence that had grown between her and Lily. Inside the cafe, the air was thick with cinnamon, coffee, and maple syrup. Wooden beams ran across the ceiling, strings of paper leaves dangled from them in festive loops, and every table seemed filled with families leaning close over steaming mugs. On one wall, children's drawings were taped in colorful clusters, rainbows, pumpkins, a stick-figure dog with a heroic cape. Madison steered Lily to a table by the window. Her daughter sat quietly, pulling her sketch pad from her purple backpack without being asked. Soon, the sharp scratch of pencil on paper filled the small silence between them as Lily bent over the page, sketching a maple leaf caught mid-fall outside the glass. Madison went to the counter to order. The barista, Carmen, greeted her with a bright grin. Carmen was a young woman in her late 20s, her round cheeks dusted with freckles, her curly black hair held back by a bandana. She had flour smudged on her apron, evidence she'd been helping in the kitchen as well. "Your daughter's an artist," Carmen said warmly, nodding toward Lily. Madison glanced back, her lips tightening in something between pride and sadness. "She likes to draw," she replied softly, and left it at that. She returned to the table with a latte for herself and a hot cider for Lily. She set the mug down in front of her daughter, who gave a faint nod but didn't look up from her sketch. Madison sighed, her fingers tightening on the edge of her cup. She had promised herself this outing would be different, that she would find the words or signs to reach Lily. But even here, in a place painted with warmth, she still felt like a guest in her own child's world. The bell over the door chimed again. A burst of boyish laughter tumbled inside before the new arrivals even crossed the threshold. Ethan Brooks rushed in first, a stuffed triceratops clutched under his arm, his sweater patterned with green dinosaurs. His sandy hair stuck out in uneven tufts, giving him the look of a child who had fought valiantly against a comb that morning and declared victory. Behind him came Daniel, tall, steady, his flannel shirt open over a plain gray tee. His hazel eyes swept the room with quiet attentiveness, and at his side walked Shadow, the German shepherd whose white cloth blindfold drew immediate notice. Shadow moved with practiced certainty, guided by Ethan's small but sure hand on the leash. His ears twitched, his nose lifted slightly, charting the cafe through senses sharper than sight. Madison noticed them only distantly at first, her attention fixed on Lily. It was Ethan's sudden dash toward their table that jolted her. The boy's eager footsteps pattered across the floor until he was standing just a few feet from Lily, peering unabashedly at her sketchpad. "That's awesome!" he exclaimed, his voice bright and loud enough that several patrons looked over. Madison's protective instincts flared. She shifted forward, ready to tell the boy to step back. But Daniel hadn't followed immediately. He paused, still by the doorway, his teacher's eyes narrowing with a familiar kind of perception. He watched Lily carefully. She hadn't reacted to Ethan's voice at all. She stayed bent over her drawing, her pencil steady, her shoulders unflinching at the sudden noise. Madison placed a drink before her without expecting thanks, and Lily accepted it without looking up. Daniel had seen this before, this quiet, this cocoon of inward focus. He recognized the signs. Lily was deaf. With that realization, Daniel's demeanor shifted. He walked toward the table, calm and deliberate, crouching slightly when he reached them so he wouldn't loom over the girl. He didn't speak. Instead, his hands lifted in a fluid, practiced rhythm of American Sign Language. His brows arched, his expression alive, his hands moving with clarity. "My son likes your drawing. May he take a closer look?" For a moment, the cafe seemed to still. Lily's eyes shot upward, startled, her green gaze locking on him. Recognition flared. She blinked, then a smile broke across her face, a smile so sudden and radiant it made Madison's breath catch. Her hands, usually hesitant when signing with her mother, now moved quickly, confidently. "Yes, I am drawing leaves. Every leaf is different, like snowflakes." Daniel nodded, mirroring her enthusiasm with his own expressions. "She's very talented," he said aloud, glancing briefly at Madison. His voice carried a faint southern drawl, soft but steady. "I'm Daniel. That's my son, Ethan." Madison straightened, her corporate reflexes kicking in, even as her heart thudded. "Madison, this is Lily." Her voice was formal, but inside she was stunned, at her daughter's joy and at the man who had unlocked it in seconds. Meanwhile, Ethan had already slid into the empty chair across from Lily, Triceratops squeezed under his arm. "Can I draw too?" he asked eagerly. Lily hesitated, then nodded, nudging her box of colored pencils toward him. Ethan grinned, picked out a green pencil, and began adding a clumsy, dinosaur shape among her leaves. Shadow lowered himself onto the floor beside the table, his great head resting on his paws. After a moment, as though guided by instinct, he shifted closer to Lily's chair. The girl glanced down, curious, then extended a tentative hand. Shadow leaned into her touch, pressing his broad head gently into her palm. His fur was coarse beneath her fingers, his body warm and steady. She smiled again, softer this time, as if some invisible barrier had been crossed. Madison watched all of it unfold, the laughter between the children, the ease with which Daniel signed, the way Shadow seemed to choose her daughter without hesitation. Relief swelled in her chest, sharp and bittersweet. For years she had longed for Lily to open, to connect. And now, here it was. But it hadn't been her who had given it. It was this man, this boy, this blind dog. Jealousy and gratitude warred inside her, a storm she could neither name nor resolve. For the first time in years, Lily looked alive, radiant. And Madison could only sit, coffee cooling in her untouched hands, wondering if she had already lost something she had been trying so desperately to find. The following Wednesday evening brought with it a drizzle that turned the streets of Brooklyn into shimmering mirrors. Yellow lamplight reflected off wet pavement, puddles rippled with every passing car, and the faint hum of city life carried through the cool, damp air. Madison Clark gripped Lily's hand as they approached a low brick building that stood at the corner of a quiet block. Above the doorway hung a wooden sign painted with simple letters, Brooklyn Community Center. It was Daniel's invitation that had brought them here, and though Madison's instinct was to retreat into the safety of her routines, the memory of Lily's radiant smile at the cafe urged her forward. Inside, the scent of chalk dust and old wood greeted them. The center's multi-purpose room had been transformed into a makeshift classroom, folding chairs arranged in a circle, posters on the walls illustrating the American Sign Language alphabet, and a whiteboard covered with notes from previous lessons. Children of different ages clustered in small groups, their parents standing nearby, some chatting nervously, others flipping through beginner sign language booklets. Daniel was already there, arranging a stack of colorful flashcards on a table. He looked up when they entered, his expression warm and encouraging. "You made it," he signed, and spoke at the same time, his hands moving with fluid confidence. Madison nodded stiffly, adjusting the strap of her designer bag. Lily, on the other hand, broke into a smile and waved eagerly, her small fingers spelling out, "Hello, Daniel." Several children noticed her immediately. Among them was a girl of about Lily's age named Emily Turner. Emily was petite, with chestnut hair cut into a neat bob, and glasses that slid down her nose when she signed. She had been born deaf and was fluent in ASL, her hands quick and graceful. She brightened at the sight of Lily and motioned her over. Within minutes, the two were side by side, giggling silently as they shared signs like old friends. Madison watched, an ache forming in her chest. It was so easy for Lily to connect here, as though this world had been waiting for her all along. Madison, however, felt like an interloper. When Daniel called the group to attention, she shuffled into one of the folding chairs, her tall frame awkward, her tailored coat out of place among the casual sweaters and jeans. "Tonight," Daniel began, signing and speaking for both the deaf and hearing participants, "we'll focus on simple introductions and a little game to make it fun." His voice carried warmth that filled the room without effort. "Remember, it's not about perfection, it's about connection." The game involved children pairing up to teach one another new signs. Daniel handed out cards with words on them: tree, cat, happy, friend. Lily received the card for friend, and instead of keeping to herself, she stood, walked to the center of the circle, and beckoned others to join her. She signed slowly, her gestures clear, repeating until even the younger children caught on. Soon they were all laughing, signing friend in unison, their small hands weaving the word into the air like a shared secret. Madison sat frozen, astonished. Her daughter was leading, shining with a confidence she had rarely glimpsed. Meanwhile, Ethan introduced Shadow to some of the children. The German shepherd, blindfolded by his white cloth, sat obediently, ears perked. When one boy named Caleb, an 8-year-old with sandy hair and a nervous demeanor, hung back from the game, Shadow seemed to notice. Caleb's mother, Sarah, stood behind him with tired eyes. Sarah was a single mother in her mid-30s, tall and slender, her long auburn hair pulled into a messy bun. Her voice carried a trace of bitterness when she spoke, shaped by years of carrying burdens alone. She had confided earlier to Daniel that Caleb had struggled to accept his hearing aids and often resisted practicing ASL. As the laughter of the other children swelled, Caleb crossed his arms, lips pressed into a stubborn line. Then Shadow rose quietly and padded toward him, guided not by sight, but by something deeper. The dog nuzzled Caleb's hand, pressing his head gently against the boy's arm. Startled, Caleb blinked down at him. Shadow gave a soft whine, leaning more insistently until Caleb hesitantly lifted his hand to stroke the dog's coarse fur. Something softened in his face. When Daniel prompted the group to sign, "Happy," Caleb looked at Shadow, then slowly raised his hands to mimic the motion, his first willing attempt. Sarah's breath hitched, her eyes glistening with relief. Ethan, watching proudly, announced, "See? Shadow always knows who needs him. He doesn't even need to see." His voice carried such unshakable faith that even Madison found herself smiling faintly. As the class continued, Madison tried to follow along with the signs Daniel demonstrated. Her fingers stumbled, stiff and uncertain, her movements lacking the fluidity of the others. Frustration simmered in her chest. She was Madison Clark, the woman who negotiated billion-dollar contracts with ease. Yet here she could not even spell her own daughter's name without faltering. At one point, she dropped her flashcard in her lap, muttering under her breath. "This is ridiculous," Daniel noticed. He crouched beside her chair, lowering his voice. "It's not ridiculous," he said gently, his hazel eyes steady on hers. "It's brave. You're learning a new language to talk to someone you love. That's never ridiculous." He signed the words slowly as he spoke, repeating them until she nodded, absorbing the reassurance. For the first time in years, Madison felt as though someone had seen through her armor, past the polished exterior she wore like a shield. By the end of the class, the room buzzed with energy. Children raced around signing. Clumsily but joyfully, parents practiced greetings with one another, and laughter filled the spaces where silence had once reigned. Lily was still at the center, showing Emily how to sign Autumn with dramatic sweeps of her arms. Shadow lay curled at the feet of Caleb, who now leaned against him as if he had always belonged there. Sarah, standing nearby, caught Madison's gaze. For the first time that night, her weary features softened into a smile of shared understanding. As chairs scraped and families began to gather their things, Daniel clapped his hands lightly to draw attention. "Great work, everyone. Remember, every sign you learn tonight is a door you can open to connect with someone. Keep opening them." His words lingered, a simple truth hanging in the air. Madison held Lily's coat for her as they left, her heart unsettled but lighter. She glanced back one last time to see Shadow raising his head, ears twitching as if sensing her hesitation. And she wondered, maybe she too needed someone like Shadow to guide her, blind but sure, toward the doors she had yet to open. The morning sun rose pale and thin over Manhattan, its light veiled by layers of restless gray clouds. A storm seemed to loom, not only in the sky, but in Madison Clark's world. She sat at the head of a long oak table in the sleek glass tower of Clark and Lowell Enterprises, the company she had helped build into one of New York's most influential consulting firms. Normally, the boardroom was her throne, a place where she commanded respect with sharp words and sharper strategies. But today, whispers ran along the polished wood before the meeting even began. Newspapers lay scattered, screens glowed with online headlines, and Madison's face appeared everywhere. CEOs fall from grace? Madison Clark neglects empire for charity romance. From boardroom to playground, Clark's troubling choices. The words clawed at her like talons. On the large projection screen, a grainy photograph appeared. Madison seated in the community center classroom, Lily laughing beside her, Daniel leaning over with a smile, and in the foreground, Shadow, the blindfolded shepherd, his head resting on a child's lap. To the public eye, it was not a picture of warmth, but a scandalous tableau, a powerful CEO entangled in a distraction, abandoning her duties. At the far end of the table sat Gregory Pierce, the firm's senior vice president, a man in his late 50s with a hawkish face, sharp suits, and an ambition that had once been Madison's ally, but had long since turned adversarial. Gregory's salt and pepper hair was combed immaculately, his expression one of rehearsed regret. "Madison," he began, his voice smooth yet cutting, The board is deeply concerned. Investors are unsettled. Clients are questioning your focus. And the media. He gestured toward the projected image, letting the silence sting. Beside him, two board members nodded in agreement. One, Margaret Shaw, was a heavy-set woman in her 60s, known for her stern pragmatism. She tapped her pen against her notepad with each word Gregory spoke, as if keeping rhythm with his accusations. The other, Robert Lang, younger and more impressionable, shifted uncomfortably, clearly torn, but unwilling to defend Madison openly. Madison drew in a steadying breath. She wore a navy suit that morning, her tall frame poised, but her knuckles white against the table's edge. "This is a gross mischaracterization," she said, her voice firm, though her chest tightened. "Yes, I attended a community class with my daughter. I am not abandoning my company. I am expanding its heart." Gregory smirked faintly. "Expanding its heart won't pay the bills. Investors want numbers, not sentiment." His eyes glinted as he leaned forward. "Or are you suggesting that attending classes with a charity case teacher and a blind dog somehow contributes to Clark and Lowell's growth strategy?" Madison clenched her jaw. The insinuation stung more than the accusation itself. Daniel's modest profession, Shadow's disability, Lily's condition, all reduced to ammunition in Gregory's arsenal. The room buzzed with murmurs until Margaret raised her hand. "We've convened this emergency session because reputation is everything in our industry. Madison, we need clarity. Where are your priorities? With Clark and Lowell, or with this new life you've entangled yourself in?" The words hit her like blows. She opened her mouth, but the polished rhetoric that had always come so easily deserted her. Images of Lily signing with joy, Shadow pressing into Caleb's trembling hand, and Daniel's steady gaze flooded her mind. And for the first time in her career, Madison Clark, master of the boardroom, faltered. Outside the glass walls of the skyscraper, the storm clouds thickened. Inside, the storm was already breaking. At that moment, the heavy double doors creaked open. Gasps rippled across the room as a small boy darted in, cheeks flushed from the effort of climbing so many flights of stairs. Ethan Brooks, with his messy brown hair and oversized sweater, clutched the strap of his school backpack, his wide eyes scanning the intimidating faces of the board. Behind him came a flurry of hurried footsteps. Sarah, who had been asked by Daniel to keep an eye on Ethan that morning, rushed after him. Her auburn hair, always untamed, now clung damply to her temples from the rain. She looked harried and apologetic, but Ethan ignored her protests. "Mom," he called breathlessly. Then, realizing Madison wasn't his mother, he corrected, "Ms. Clark, where's my dad?" His voice echoed awkwardly in the sterile corporate air. Before anyone could answer, another sound followed, the clicking of nails on polished marble. Shadow emerged, nose lifted, ears twitching beneath the white cloth tied around his eyes. He walked with a slow but determined gait, his tail brushing against the chair legs as he moved unerringly toward Ethan. Despite the murmurs and shifting feet, Shadow did not falter. He found Ethan, pressed his head firmly against the boy's side, and stood, a silent guardian in a world he could not see. The boardroom fell into silence. Even Gregory's sharp tongue paused mid-preparation. There was something disarming about the sight. A blind dog, calm in the chaos, finding his way through instinct and devotion. Ethan stroked Shadow's fur, his voice carrying in the hush. "See? He always finds me. He doesn't need to see to know where I am." The words, so simple, rippled through the room with unexpected weight. Madison felt a lump rise in her throat. She rose from her seat, her tall figure straightening as though fueled by something stronger than pride. She placed her hands on the table, then signed deliberately, her movements slow but sure, before speaking the words aloud for everyone to hear. "If a blind dog can find his way to the one he loves," she signed and said, her voice steady, "then I, his owner, his leader, his friend, can find my way back to my daughter's voice. And if Clark and Lowell cannot see the value in building bridges with the deaf community, then perhaps it is the board that has lost its vision, not me." For the first time that morning, she felt power surge back into her veins. Not the power of cold numbers or ruthless deals, but the power of truth. She pulled a folder from her bag, sliding it across the table. Inside was a draft strategy she had been quietly developing, a campaign for Clark and Lowell to lead initiatives in accessibility, promoting inclusive communication, and positioning the firm as a pioneer in bridging corporate influence with social responsibility. This, Madison continued, her voice carrying over the stunned silence, is the future, not just for my daughter, not just for Shadow or Ethan or Daniel, but for Clark and Lowell. We can be the company that listens, the company that sees where others refuse to look. The room shifted. Margaret stopped tapping her pen. Robert leaned forward with visible intrigue, and even a flicker of doubt crossed Gregory's sharp features. Outside, thunder rolled across the Manhattan sky. But inside the boardroom, Madison's words struck louder. She no longer felt cornered. She felt, finally, free. The storm had passed, both in the sky and in Madison Clark's heart. The headlines that once sought to bury her had instead ignited a spark of something greater. Investors, far from pulling away, had leaned in, drawn to her bold new vision of Clark and Lowell as a leader in accessibility and inclusion. The board, after long hours of debate and her relentless persuasion, had rallied behind her. Gregory Pierce, sharp-suited and sharp-tongued, had been forced to retreat, his smirk vanishing as the tide turned against him. For the first time in years, Madison felt not only powerful, but purposeful. Yet that triumph in the boardroom was only the beginning. What mattered more lay outside the skyscraper's glass walls, in the laughter of her daughter, in the patient kindness of Daniel, and in the steady companionship of a blind shepherd whose white cloth now seemed less a mark of loss than a banner of courage. It was on a golden evening, when the city softened beneath the glow of twilight, that Madison truly realized how far her world had shifted. The Brooklyn Bridge loomed above, its cables etched like harp strings against the sky, and beneath it, the park spread wide and welcoming. The East River shimmered with liquid fire as the sun slid toward the horizon. Families gathered along the paths, joggers moved to the rhythm of their headphones, and the air smelled faintly of roasted chestnuts from a nearby cart. Madison walked with Lily at her side, the girl clutching a small sketchbook where half-drawn leaves and tiny figures danced across the pages. Her dark hair caught the breeze, and her eyes, so often shadowed by silence, were bright now, alive with expression. She signed eagerly about the boats that glided along the river, her hands painting images in the air that words could never quite capture. Daniel walked beside them, his stride easy and unhurried, as if the chaos of the city could never touch him. He was dressed casually in a soft gray sweater and jeans, his hair tousled by the wind. There was something steady in him, something that drew Madison closer with every step. She found herself glancing at him more often than she intended, wondering how a man who had faced so many hardships could carry such calm in his eyes. Ethan skipped a few steps ahead, his laughter ringing out clear and uninhibited. The boy's energy was boundless. His sweater flapped against him as he ran circles around Shadow. And Shadow, faithful, unseeing, but never lost, trotted forward with sure steps, his nose twitching, his ears attuned to the world. The white scarf that Madison had tied gently around his eyes fluttered in the wind like a pennant. Each time Ethan slowed, Shadow stopped as well, pressing close to the boy's leg as if to remind him, "I'm here. I'll always find you." Sarah had joined them too, at Madison's invitation. The auburn-haired woman, tall and lean, with a figure shaped by years of running late to too many places, kept a respectful distance but smiled whenever Ethan shouted for her to look. Life had not been gentle to Sarah. She had once been a painter, full of wild dreams, until the sudden death of her younger brother left her hollowed and cautious. Since then, she had guarded her heart with sarcasm and detachment. Yet that evening, walking beneath the softening sky, her edges seemed less sharp. Watching Ethan with Lily and Shadow, she allowed herself a rare smile, small, crooked, but real. They found a bench near the waterfront, and the group settled there as the sun dipped lower. Madison sat with Lily curled against her, sketchbook resting on the child's knees. Ethan leaned against Daniel's side, his chatter slowing as the day's energy finally gave way to calm. Shadow lay at their feet, his body still strong despite the years, his breathing steady. Lily lifted her hands, catching Daniel's attention. Her signs were deliberate, careful. She wanted to be understood. "House, not place," she signed, pausing as her fingers brushed the air. House is where we are understood. Daniel translated softly for Madison, though she had already caught most of it herself. Madison's throat tightened. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "She's right," she whispered. Her gaze shifted toward Daniel, then to Ethan, and finally down to Shadow. Home isn't about walls or titles. It's about this, about us. Daniel's lips curved into a smile, quiet but profound. He signed back to Lily. "Yes, home is here." Ethan, not to be left behind, wrapped his arms around Shadow's neck and declared, "Then Shadow is home too. He's our glue." The boy's words rang out with such conviction that even Sarah chuckled under her breath. Madison laughed softly, the sound carrying on the wind. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she allowed herself to imagine something more than survival. She imagined evenings like this one, where laughter replaced boardroom tension, where her daughter's silence no longer felt like absence, but like another language waiting to be heard. She imagined a future where her heart did not ache with emptiness, but pulsed with belonging. The last rays of sunlight stretched across the water, painting their small group in hues of gold and crimson. Shadow lifted his head, ears pricked as if he too sensed the significance of the moment. The scarf around his eyes fluttered higher in the breeze, a banner against the darkness. And there, beneath the Brooklyn sunset, a family was not born of blood alone, but of choice, courage, and the simple act of seeing one another, truly seeing, even in silence. Sometimes God's miracles do not come in thunder or lightning. They arrive quietly, in the shape of a child's smile, in the touch of a hand that finally feels understood, or in the steady steps of a blind dog who still finds the way home. This story reminds us that no darkness is too deep for His light to guide us through. Every day we are invited to open our eyes, our hearts, and our homes to love that heals and restores. If you believe that God still works wonders in the small moments of our lives, then let this story be your reminder. Share it with someone who needs hope. Comment below and write Amen if you believe that faith can turn silence into song and loneliness into family. Subscribe to the channel to join this journey of stories where God's love is revealed in unexpected ways. May the Lord bless you and your family with peace, strength, and the courage to keep believing.